The metallic crash echoed throughout Westfield Academy's cafeteria as the state-of-the-art electric wheelchair went tumbling. 17-year-old Charlotte Reeves hitting the cold linoleum floor with a sickening thud. Mason Bradley, the mayor's son, stood over her with a malicious grin plastered across his privileged face. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Are you hurt?" His voice dripped with fake concern that made the entire crowd of students around them snicker and whisper. Charlotte slowly pulled herself up, her eyes never leaving Mason's. "My sister will hear about this. Trust me, you're going to regret it." Mason just laughed harder, completely unaware that in exactly 30 minutes he would meet someone capable of taking down the entire football team with nothing but her bare hands. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story of justice and sisterly protection, I want to take just a moment to thank you for being here. Stories like Charlotte's need to be heard, and you make that possible by watching and sharing. If this story resonates with you or reminds you of someone who's faced similar challenges, please consider leaving a comment below about your own experiences. Your stories create a community where no one feels alone in their struggles. The prestigious hallways of Westfield Academy had always operated under an unspoken hierarchy where family names carried more weight than report cards, where parking lots gleamed with luxury vehicles that cost more than most people's annual salaries, and where a single donation could erase any transgression from a student's permanent record. Charlotte Reeves had earned her place at this elite Connecticut boarding school through pure academic brilliance, her full scholarship covering the $85,000 annual tuition that her single mother could never afford. But money couldn't buy acceptance among the legacy students who'd been groomed for Westfield since birth. And Charlotte's excellence, her refusal to shrink herself to make others comfortable, had painted a target on her back from day one. What none of these privileged bullies realized was that Charlotte possessed something far more valuable than their trust funds or family connections. As she carefully repositioned herself back into her wheelchair, her movements precise and calculated, something glinted on her wrist that the casual observer might miss. A black tactical sports watch, the kind worn by athletes who understood timing, precision, and strategy. Her posture, even seated, held an alertness that spoke of someone accustomed to scanning exits and assessing threats. Most tellingly, her reaction to Mason's attack carried none of the panic or fear that typically accompanied such violations. Instead, Charlotte's composure suggested someone who knew backup was coming. Mason Bradley had spent his entire 18 years believing that consequences were for other people, that his father's political influence and the family's 7-figure donations to Westfield's endowment fund created an invisible shield around him. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with the kind of athletic build that made teachers look the other way when he cut classes, Mason commanded respect through intimidation rather than earning it through character. His latest target had been carefully chosen: a scholarship student, disabled, with no powerful family to protect her. In his twisted logic, Charlotte represented everything he'd been taught to look down upon: merit over money, intelligence over inheritance, dignity despite disadvantage. "You know what, wheelchair girl?" Mason's voice carried across the suddenly silent cafeteria as students pulled out their phones, sensing drama about to unfold. "I think you need to learn some respect. Maybe if you spent less time acting like you belong here and more time being grateful for the charity keeping you enrolled, we wouldn't have these misunderstandings." His friends Jake Morrison and Tyler Chen flanked him like bodyguards, their smirks reflecting years of enabling behavior that had never faced real consequences. Charlotte's fingers moved to something concealed within her wheelchair's storage compartment, a device so small it could have been mistaken for a phone accessory. What appeared to be nervous fidgeting was actually the activation of a recording system that would capture every word, every threat, every piece of evidence needed to document this harassment with military precision. The tiny device, designed with capabilities that went far beyond consumer electronics, began creating an encrypted backup that would automatically sync to secure cloud storage with precise timestamps that could withstand legal scrutiny. While Charlotte discreetly documented the encounter, something extraordinary was happening just outside the cafeteria's main entrance. A new student moved through the hallway with the fluid grace of someone whose body was a finely tuned instrument. Taylor's registration paperwork listed her as a transfer student from a military academy in California, but her athletic tape wrapped around her wrists and the way she unconsciously assessed every doorway and potential exit point suggested training that went far beyond typical high school athletics. The timing of her arrival at Westfield Academy, just 3 days after Charlotte's harassment had begun escalating, was no coincidence. "Did you hear that?" Jake Morrison leaned in closer to Charlotte, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Mason asked you a question. Where are your manners?" The crowd around them had grown larger, phones recording from multiple angles as students sensed something significant was about to happen. Some watched with the morbid curiosity of bystanders, others with the uncomfortable recognition that they'd remained silent too many times before. Charlotte's response carried a calmness that unnerved her attackers. "I heard him perfectly. I also heard the part where he admitted to deliberately knocking me out of my wheelchair. I'm sure the disciplinary committee will find that very interesting when they review the security footage." Her knowledge of the camera angles, the exact timing of security rotations, and the school's official policies revealed preparation that went far beyond what any typical student would possess. The mention of consequences caused Mason's confident facade to flicker momentarily. Throughout his years at Westfield, his father's influence had consistently erased any disciplinary actions before they could affect his transcript or college applications. But something in Charlotte's tone suggested she understood legal proceedings in ways that made his usual escape routes seem suddenly unreliable. "You think anyone's going to believe your word against mine? You think some sob story about the poor disabled girl is going to protect you from what's coming?" Unknown to Mason, his escalating threats were being transmitted in real time to someone who had spent years learning to recognize the exact moment when verbal intimidation crossed into credible physical threats. Taylor Reeves might have appeared to be just another transfer student filling out enrollment paperwork, but her immediate change in direction toward the cafeteria suggested communication channels that the school's administration had no knowledge of. The harassment that had begun 3 weeks earlier now followed a pattern that Charlotte had been meticulously documenting. It started with social media harassment, a group chat Mason had created called Wheelchair Princess, where he and his friends shared memes mocking disabled students and planned increasingly elaborate pranks. The digital trail they were creating would later prove invaluable to investigators, but for now, it served as a roadmap to escalating cruelty that followed predictable patterns of institutional bullying. "You know what I think?" Tyler Chen pulled out his phone, opening the camera app with deliberate menace. "I think we need to document this moment for posterity. Show everyone what happens when charity cases forget their place." The threat of viral humiliation had become these students' weapon of choice, understanding that social media could amplify their cruelty far beyond the confines of Westfield's campus. Charlotte's response revealed training that no ordinary high school student should possess. Rather than cowering or pleading, she shifted her position to ensure optimal audio pickup for her concealed recording device while simultaneously positioning herself within the security camera's optimal viewing angle. Her movements were subtle but deliberate, suggesting someone who understood both surveillance technology and evidence preservation procedures. As Tyler began recording, Charlotte spoke directly into his camera, with a composure that sent ripples of unease through the crowd. "For the record, This is Tyler Chen, Jake Morrison, and Mason Bradley. Today is October 15th, and the time is approximately 12:45 p.m. They have surrounded me in the cafeteria and are making threats while recording for what they've described as humiliation purposes. Her formal language and precise documentation created an official record that would be impossible to deny or manipulate later. Mason's anger at losing control of the narrative pushed him toward the physical escalation that Charlotte had been predicting. "Shut your mouth and get out of that chair. I want to see if you can actually stand, or if this whole thing is just for attention." His demand crossed every line of human decency, but more importantly, from a legal standpoint, it constituted assault of a disabled person under federal hate crime statutes. The cafeteria had gone completely silent, except for the hum of recording devices and the distant sound of approaching footsteps that most students were too focused to notice. Charlotte's next words would later be quoted in news articles and legal briefs across the country. "Mason Bradley, son of Mayor Richard Bradley, you have just committed assault against a disabled student while being recorded by multiple witnesses. You have approximately 27 minutes before this situation becomes very complicated for you." While Charlotte meticulously documented every aspect of her harassment, innovative recording technology had revolutionized how evidence could be preserved and protected. The device she utilized featured encryption capabilities that ensured authentic timestamps and prevented tampering, automatically creating multiple backup copies stored in secure cloud systems that could withstand legal challenges. This type of evidence preservation technology had become essential for victims of harassment who needed to build bulletproof cases against powerful opponents. Tyler's recording captured Mason's next escalation with crystal clarity. 27 minutes until what? Until your mommy comes to pick you up early? Until the school counselor gives us another lecture about being nice? His mocking tone revealed someone who had never faced real accountability for his actions. But Charlotte's specific time frame suggested she knew something he didn't. 27 minutes until my sister gets out of her meeting with the athletics department. Charlotte's revelation sent a murmur through the crowd. None of the students recalled any sister being enrolled at Westfield, and the reference to the athletics department suggested connections that didn't align with Charlotte's scholarship student status. Jake Morrison grabbed Charlotte's wheelchair handles, preparing to demonstrate his power through physical domination. "Well then, we better make these 27 minutes count. Let's see how tough you are when you can't hide behind that chair." His threat of removing her from her mobility device constituted felony assault under federal disability rights laws, but more immediately, it triggered a response system that none of them had anticipated. The quiet approach of footsteps had grown louder, and students near the cafeteria entrance began turning their heads toward a figure moving with unmistakable purpose. Taylor Reeves appeared in the doorway, and her mere presence seemed to change the atmosphere of the entire room. Standing 5 feet 8 inches, with the kind of controlled posture that spoke of years of disciplined training, she surveyed the scene with eyes that missed nothing. Charlotte caught her sister's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The twins had developed their own communication system over the years, and that single gesture conveyed everything Taylor needed to know about the situation. The time frame had been accurate. The evidence was being collected. The legal documentation was proceeding according to plan. Now came the part where consequences would finally catch up with students who believed themselves untouchable. "Excuse me," Taylor's voice carried across the cafeteria with the kind of quiet authority that made everyone turn toward her. "Is there a problem here?" Her question seemed casual, but her positioning and the way she moved through the crowd suggested training that went far beyond typical high school self-defense classes. Mason turned toward this new arrival with the same arrogant confidence he'd shown throughout the encounter. Just having a conversation with your wheelchair-bound classmate here. Nothing that concerns you. Transfer student." His dismissive tone revealed that he saw Taylor as just another obstacle to be intimidated into submission. Actually, Taylor's smile carried no warmth as she stepped closer. "Charlotte is my sister. So this concerns me very much." The revelation sent shockwaves through the watching students. The confident transfer student was related to their target, which meant Mason had just made an enemy of someone whose capabilities were completely unknown to him. Charlotte watched her sister approach with the satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans were unfolding exactly as anticipated. The next phase of their strategy was about to begin, and Mason Bradley had no idea that his 30 minutes of reckoning had officially begun. The recognition hit Mason like a physical blow, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "So what if you're sisters? That just means there are 2 charity cases I need to deal with." He gestured for Jake and Tyler to spread out, surrounding both girls in what he clearly believed would be an easy intimidation tactic. "Maybe watching your sister get the same treatment will teach you both some respect." Taylor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and students who understood body language recognized the subtle changes that preceded action. Her weight distribution became more centered. Her hands moved to a ready position that looked casual but provided instant access to defensive techniques, and her eyes began tracking the movement patterns of all 3 boys with the precision of someone trained to assess multiple threats simultaneously. "Mason!" Charlotte's voice carried a warning that the mayor's son was too blinded by rage to heed. "This is your last chance to walk away. My sister really doesn't like bullies." The crowd around them had grown larger, with students from neighboring tables abandoning their lunches to witness what was clearly building toward an unprecedented confrontation. "Your sister doesn't scare me," Mason snarled, taking a step closer to Taylor with the kind of chest-puffing bravado that had always worked before. "I don't care if she's been to some fancy military school. This is my territory, and you're both about to learn what happens when people forget their place." His hand reached out to shove Taylor, confident that his size advantage would end this quickly. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms and analyzed frame by frame by martial arts enthusiasts worldwide. Taylor moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Her response so quick and controlled that Mason's aggressive push met nothing but air. In one seamless motion, she redirected his momentum, used his own force against him, and sent him stumbling backward into a nearby lunch table with a crash that sent trays flying. Jake Morrison, seeing his leader embarrassed, charged forward with the kind of bull rush tactics that worked in football but proved useless against someone trained in actual combat sports. Taylor's counter was a textbook demonstration of how proper technique defeats raw strength. She sidestepped his attack, caught his arm in a controlled joint lock, and guided him gently but firmly to the ground where he found himself unable to move without causing his own pain. Tyler Chen, recognizing that this situation had spiraled beyond anything they had anticipated, tried to back away while still recording, but Taylor's training included situational awareness that tracked all threats simultaneously. "Tyler," she said calmly, never taking her eyes off Mason, who was picking himself up from the lunch table. "I suggest you stop recording and start thinking about how you're going to explain this to your parents." The entire sequence had taken less than 30 seconds, but the psychological impact was far more devastating than any prolonged fight could have been. Mason Bradley, the untouchable mayor's son, had just been effortlessly handled by a girl who hadn't even appeared to break a sweat. The video evidence being captured by dozens of phones would make it impossible for him to spin this encounter in his favor. As the confrontation escalated beyond what anyone had expected, Charlotte quickly activated a personal safety application that had revolutionized how people could protect themselves and preserve evidence during dangerous situations. The app automatically began live streaming the encounter while simultaneously sending emergency alerts to pre-designated contacts and law enforcement. This technology included GPS tracking, automatic evidence backup, and real-time communication with safety networks designed to help victims of harassment and assault. Mason's humiliation transformed into pure rage as he realized that dozens of phones were capturing his defeat. "You think this is over?" His voice cracked with fury and embarrassment. "Do you have any idea who my father is? One phone call and you'll both be expelled before dinner. Your scholarship will disappear, and your military academy sister can go back to whatever hole you both crawled out of." Taylor's response revealed training that went far beyond typical high school athletics. "Actually, Mason, I think you should worry more about federal assault charges than phone calls to Daddy. What you did to my sister constitutes a hate crime under the Americans with Disabilities Act. What you just attempted against me was caught on multiple recordings that are already being uploaded to cloud storage with timestamps that prove premeditation." The legal terminology and her precise understanding of federal statutes sent a chill through the watching crowd. This wasn't a typical high school confrontation anymore. Taylor spoke with the confidence of someone who understood exactly how the justice system worked and had the resources to use it effectively. Charlotte pulled out her phone and showed the recording interface that had been capturing everything. 47 minutes of documented harassment, including threats, assault on a disabled person, and attempted intimidation of witnesses. Plus, whatever my sister's been recording since she arrived. The systematic evidence collection revealed planning that went far beyond what any normal students would have undertaken. Principal Davidson chose that moment to finally appear, having been alerted by the commotion and the rapidly growing crowd of students. His face showed the kind of panic that administrators experienced when they realized a situation had escalated beyond their ability to quietly suppress it. "What exactly is happening here?" His voice carried the forced authority of someone hoping to regain control of an uncontrollable situation. "Principal Davidson," Taylor's voice remained perfectly calm, "we've just documented a systematic pattern of harassment and assault against disabled students at your institution. The evidence has been automatically forwarded to the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, the local FBI field office, and several news outlets that specialize in educational discrimination cases." The principal's face went white as he processed the implications. Federal involvement meant investigations that couldn't be silenced by donations or political influence. Media attention meant scrutiny that would expose every policy failure and cover-up attempt. His career was potentially ending in real-time broadcast live to hundreds of students who were sharing the footage across every social media platform imaginable. Mason made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "This is insane! They attacked us! The footage will show that these girls are the aggressors!" But his protest rang hollow when every recording clearly showed him initiating physical contact, while Taylor had only defended herself and her sister. "Actually," Charlotte smiled for the first time during the entire confrontation, "the footage shows you assaulting a disabled student, making threats based on disability status, and then attempting to assault someone who was trying to protect a vulnerable person. That's going to play very well on the evening news." The aftermath unfolded with the kind of swift justice that rarely occurred in institutional settings. Within hours, the live-streamed confrontation had been viewed over 2 million times under the hashtag #SisterProtector. News outlets picked up the story, featuring Charlotte's articulate explanation of systematic harassment alongside footage of Taylor's masterful defensive techniques. Legal experts appeared on talk shows to discuss hate crime statutes and federal protections for disabled students. Mason Bradley, Jake Morrison, and Tyler Chen were expelled the following morning after an emergency school board meeting that lasted less than 20 minutes. Principal Davidson submitted his resignation before investigators could formally interview him. Mayor Bradley held a press conference where he publicly apologized for his son's behavior and announced Mason would be attending a residential facility focused on character development and anger management. But the most significant victory wasn't the punishment of the bullies or the policy changes at Westfield Academy. Charlotte and Taylor had demonstrated that systematic harassment could be defeated through preparation, evidence collection, and strategic response. Their story inspired similar confrontations at schools across the country as students realized they didn't have to accept abuse from those who believed power made them untouchable. 3 weeks after the cafeteria confrontation, Charlotte sat in her wheelchair reviewing college acceptance letters, while Taylor practiced forms in their shared dorm room. The scholarship offers had poured in from universities that wanted to associate themselves with students who had shown such courage and intelligence under pressure. But it was the unmarked envelope that arrived that afternoon that changed everything. Inside was a simple letter on government letterhead with an official seal that neither sister recognized immediately. The message was brief. Your unique skills and commitment to protecting vulnerable populations have been noted. There are other schools, other students who need advocates like you. Are you interested in expanding your mission beyond Westfield Academy? Taylor examined the government letter while Charlotte studied the official seal with growing excitement. Someone in authority had been monitoring their methods and wanted to expand their mission nationwide. Charlotte's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Mission Alpha authorization pending. Await further instructions. She showed Taylor, whose expression shifted to determination. Both sisters realized their confrontation with Mason Bradley had been just the beginning. Other students faced systematic harassment. Other bullies believed themselves protected by wealth and influence. Other institutions failed their vulnerable members. They had proven that preparation, evidence, and strategic thinking could defeat even the most protected bullies. Federal law provided powerful tools for those who understood how to use them. Most importantly, victims could become victors when they refused to accept injustice. Charlotte looked at her sister with a smile that promised future adventures. Looks like we have a new mission, sis.